Is a trip to somewhere in the US in your bucket list, or are you planning a trip to the United States? In this case, this video is for you. I'm gonna explain how to travel in the US like an American while being a foreigner. And hi, if you're new to the channel, my name is Tero. I'm a mushroom entrepreneur originally from Finland, and I've lived in 10 countries myself, and almost the last decade here in the United States in New York, LA, and Austin, Texas. I have an American wife. I have 3 kids who were born and raised here, spending time here, but also living in many other countries. It's been fascinating to see how Americans like to travel and see the country versus how foreigners. And in this video, I'm gonna share some of my lessons on how to travel and experience America like a local. The first thing you have to do when you come to America, it doesn't matter where you come, even if it's New York City, you have to do a road trip. If you're a European, you probably fly from city to city, country to country, or you take the train or another form of public transport. You know, doing a road trip is not that common. Let's say you're in the south of France and you rent a car or drive there, you still drive very short distances. Similar to Asia, you take buses, trains, and airplanes, but here in America, it's all about the driving, baby. So you have to do a road trip. That is how you see the real America, not just the big cities, but all the life in between. You'll stop at fascinating gas stops and places that will probably tell you more about the culture than being in a city ever could. Just don't do the LA to San Francisco Highway 1 trip and call it a day. That is a very beautiful road. Big Sur is one of my absolute favorite top recommendations in the US. That being said, that is probably not the most ideal road trip you can do in the US. While beautiful, there's many other roads you want to experience, and really the local lifestyle of like highways and interstates is kind of where the magic is. When I lived in Los Angeles for many years, I would often see people come up, clearly Europeans, and they would rent a convertible Mustang. And then they would try to stuff 4 adult big guys in it with their suitcases, with often some of the suitcases on the back seat with 2 big guys. And then they would drive from LA to San Francisco and back. And that's probably not the move. Not to say that you shouldn't rent a convertible Mustang or hang out with your friends, but I think you can have a much more local experience if you road trip a little off ways. Roughly 10 years ago, I was listing out things on my bucket list that I've never done. And one of them was a trip to America. I've never seen at that point New York, San Francisco, LA. And I told my friends that this year I'm going to the US no matter what. And 4 of my friends joined into the mission and they shared the dream. One of them was getting married, and this was his last trip before getting married. And he was like, let's do it. Let's do a big trip, almost a month-long trip to the US. We spent a little over a week in New York, and we spent a few weeks road tripping on the West Coast, anywhere from Grand Canyon to Yosemite, San Francisco to LA and Vegas. That trip was one of the most memorable trips of my life. I learned so much. I want people to have that experience when they come to the US, have a magical experience, but also know how to look to have a more authentic experience. Some of the things we did on that trip were very local, and some of the things we did were very touristy. And in this video, I'm going to share some of my lessons on things to do to really understand and experience America for its best and worst things. Okay, so now you're on a road trip somewhere. I know it's fun to use Apple Music or Spotify, but listen to the radio. I honestly think if there's only one advice I could give to someone coming to America to really understand what American culture is, listen to the radio. Listen to all kinds of channels, from hip hop to religious Christian channels to country music. And not just the music, which I'm sure you can obviously listen to anywhere. It's also the commentary between the songs and the ads. The ads are amazing.
The day before my 8th birthday, I fell in a pile of fire ants, and since that day, I have made a solemn vow to kill every insect on planet Earth. Of all the biblical plagues, I hate the locust plague the most.
I would highly recommend you listening to radio above anything else. It's one of the most insightful things I think you can do here in America, and it's also something you can't get in Europe the same way, versus a lot of the other experiences you can get in other countries too that were imported from the US to Europe and Asia. And on that note, one thing what I recommend you don't do is eat fast food. Yes, fast food is an essential American experience. Also, it's now an international experience. You can get burgers everywhere. McDonald's is everywhere. Sure, you might have In-N-Out or Whataburger or whatever it may be that you don't have in Europe, but it's not that different, to be honest. And I don't think you're gonna, sitting in drive-through or waiting in line, you're gonna learn anything you couldn't experience elsewhere or learn anything about the American culture today. Instead, stop at diners and barbecue places. Obviously, you can have nice food as well. Austin, for example, is an amazing example of top-notch farm-to-table restaurants. but mix it up with some barbecue and diners. And the experience of eating in a diner for a European is quite unique, and I think it's definitely worth it. On that note, if you are staying at hotels, especially off the city, don't assume the breakfast to be any good. As Europeans, we're used to having a beautiful breakfast, often free of charge at the hotel we're staying at. Here, if you do get a breakfast, it is garbage. Ultra processed food with sugar, with no taste. You're lucky if you get some eggs and that's it. If you go to Europe, you probably should go to a soccer or football game. Similar to the US, if you have a chance to attend a large sporting event, it doesn't matter if it's NHL, NBA, NFL, college, it's probably college or even high school sports can be a great experience. It's not about the biggest event you can attend, but I think just going to even a high school football game, if that's possible, will be an unforgettable experience and a true representation of American culture too. Now, not every American is into sports or whatnot, but it's undoubtedly a big part of American culture, and the gathering of family units are very important in the US. It's funny how this country is so individual and selfish in certain ways, but in other ways, very community and family centric. And when you go to these events, you're gonna notice that family and community centric approach. And if you can attend any professional or collegiate or high school sporting event, that will be amazing. Americans do a lot of things differently than Europeans or Asians. Anywhere from like driving everywhere that we already talked about and having big portions and this and that. But one of the things that Americans do that you should also do while you're here is to tip. Tipping is an essential part of US culture. We could argue that it's not a good part of US culture, and instead we should just be charged more to pay a living wage to the workers, make sure they have health care and they're taken care of. But here, how it's structured, this society is very service oriented and it wants to reward great service. The salaries are like maybe probably below living wages, and then tipping allows them to go over the edge. Now, you probably shouldn't tip in places where you don't sit down. So if you go to McDonald's, and some argue even cafes, you shouldn't tip. But if you go to a sit down restaurant, always tip. How much? Give or take 20%. You can round down or up. Could you do 15, 18? Sure. And could you give more? Sure. But round that base. It's kind of baked into your price, so don't worry about it. Also, if you do go to a bar, you have to tip pretty much. You're probably going to get also maybe free drinks if you tip well, but that aside, tip in bars and sit down restaurants, no need to tip if it's self-service or fast food. An underrated part of America is how beautiful this country is and how diverse it is. It's no wonder that settlers thought this was a dream land. Once you go to different states in the US, you're gonna start to appreciate how just like Germany is not the same thing as Scotland and Finland is not the same thing as Portugal, US, each state is very unique, or at least regionally, every region is very different from each other, and the nature is very diverse. What's cool about America is the national park system, but also the state park systems in some cases. Some of the first national parks in the world were here in the US, the first one being Yellowstone, and there's so many great ones here, and some of my best experiences I've ever had is camping and visiting national parks. You can also get a beautiful lodge, you don't have to camp out, but it is a worthwhile experience. Now note, if you're coming in June, July, August time, a lot of those campsites or accommodations are booked, particularly in popular places like, let's say, Yosemite. So book ahead for accommodations for those things. Funny enough, there's not that much hiking in a lot of these cases. It's like a drive-through, but the beauty is undeniable and you can have amazing hikes too. I think as a European, I really appreciate the national parks that America has and the natural diversity that's here. A dumb but funny thing that I like to do if I have somebody visiting me is on a highway, I like to ask the trucks to honk the horn. I think it's straight from some movies. It's so funny to me that they actually do honk the horn. I think it's hilarious and my kids love it, but it's cringe as well. The other thing about traveling America like American is like, where do you go? It's a massive country and there's a lot of places you could go and a lot of interesting places. So first tip is obviously if you have friends or family that you could visit, that's probably a great way to see the country anywhere, including here, and you'll have a more local experience, even if they end up living in Kentucky or somewhere. But that aside, if you don't know anyone and this is your first time coming, I already mentioned two of my favorite places, Big Sur and Yosemite, but Grand Canyon is an unbelievable place. When I first came to the US, my friends wanted to visit Grand Canyon on the trip. And I was like, I don't really want to see it. But they wanted to go, so we went. And I was like, oh, I'm going to see the sunset and call it a day. Once I got there, it truly took my breath away. And it is an incredible experience. Grand Canyon, out of all the big sites, is probably the most impressive site I've seen in the US. Out of the cities, There's nothing like New York City. New York City is one of its kind. For better or for worse, it is an experience I haven't had anywhere, different from Hong Kong and Tokyo and Moscow and whatever. And I would say now increasingly Miami is an interesting experience as well. San Francisco and Los Angeles, especially from a downtown perspective, are very overrated. Unless you know people in LA, it might take a long time to get to know the city. Distances are long, you're sitting in traffic a lot, it's not an enjoyable experience. If you know someone locally and they can take you to certain places, you can have a great time, but after living many years in LA would not be a recommended place for most people come to visit. California is very beautiful, but LA not so much. Similar to San Francisco downtown can feel unsafe and dirty and unenjoyable, versus Northern California itself is gorgeous and there's a lot of places worth visiting. I have to address Las Vegas and New Orleans. Those are places where people love to go have a party. Also cruises, which for a Finnish Scandinavian person is pretty common. We do a lot of cruises between Finland and Sweden. But taking a cruise, going to New Orleans, going to Vegas is a way how Americans love to have fun. It feels very touristy, but it's probably a lot of American tourists in both cases. Personally, I think they're all overrated, but there are things that a lot of people love to do because they're affordable and there's a lot of drinking going on. On the other hand, I think there's cities like Chicago and states like Maine that are very underrated. I think Maine, especially in the summer, is gorgeous and there's not a lot of people there and you can have an amazing local experience. And that partially goes well to some other coastal cities. And Chicago, out of the big cities, never gets mentioned. Similarly, in the spring, summer, and fall, it is a gorgeous city and has a lot to offer, including in the food scene. If you come here in the winter, obviously like Hawaii and Florida are great. But if you want to have a colder experience, I recommend Utah over Colorado. A lot of people have heard of Colorado, want to go there. There's more people there, there's more resorts there, traffic is worse, it's a worse experience overall. Utah is the state with the second most amount of national parks in the US after California. It is a gorgeous state and the skiing is amazing. And if you land in Salt Lake City in like 45 minutes, you'll be in the slopes, which is not the case if you land in places like Denver. So I recommend Utah over Colorado if you're coming here in the winter. The last tip is when you're here, even if you don't know anyone, start chatting with strangers. People in the US are incredibly friendly. They love to chat with foreigners. They love to chat in general with anyone. So wherever you are, from grocery stores to the streets of New York, start chatting with people. You're gonna make friends very quickly here, or at least surface level friends. You're gonna learn a lot from them, maybe get recommendations. So be active in talking. Similar as American tourists walking in big groups in Europe and never meeting any Europeans, same can happen with European tourists sometimes in the US. So try to talk to strangers at different places. It's totally normal, nothing to be afraid of, and I bet you'll have a great time and learn all kinds of things. Growing up in Europe, particularly in Scandinavia, watched a lot of American TV shows and movies. So I was familiar with a lot of sayings and cultural expressions. But when I moved here, there was a lot of funny things as well. A lot of local stuff, but also a lot of like broader philosophical issues or different viewpoints, particularly around Christianity and religion and how people feel about that. And it's brought up a lot heavier here than it is in Europe, even among people who are Christian in Europe. Similarly, people are very emotional about politics, and generally there's just a good rule of like, don't discuss politics and religion. Although Americans are very willing to talk about them, and as a foreigner, you kind of get a free pass. So if you're interested in the topic, you can ask people about elections and whatnot, and you usually give their opinion, and you can just say, I'm a foreigner, I don't understand it, but I'm curious on what you think. The other thing is obviously the health and portion sizes here are somewhat questionable. I'm not saying America is the least healthy country in the world, but it's definitely not the healthiest either. One example of that, when I got here, a friend of mine who I came with was chatting with a local girl who was in a fitness regimen. And she was saying is she's been eating really clean lately to lose weight. And my friend asked, cool, what's in your diet? And she said, chicken and waffles. And now that I've lived in America, and especially partially in the South, I kind of understand the chicken and waffle culture too, but it was just so mind-blowing that that person thought that chicken and waffles is a healthy diet. When you come here, you should also assume people don't know anything about where you come from. Obviously, if you come from Paris and London, they've heard about it or generally understand, but geography is not one of the strong suits of Americans. Just assume they don't know much, but also don't be offended if they think your native country or city is in Canada or something. It's not trying to be mean. It's not just something they are very educated on necessarily. Some are, but many are not.
Somebody does Africa?
Nope.
Russia? Nope, that's China.
A useful way to approach almost anything in the US is just to play the foreigner card. Americans are not going to be offended that you're not an American, like in France. Americans are really naturally curious and optimistic people, and they want to meet new people. So if you're a foreigner, that's almost a bonus. Obviously, try to smile, say please and thank you. Those are very, very important things for Americans.
Say please and thank you. When you hear a sneeze, say bless you. Open doors and pull out chairs. Don't push people down the stairs.
So that was it. That was my tips as a non-American after living almost a decade in the US on how I think you should travel in the US as a foreigner if you want to travel like an American. If there's something you disagree with, or if I missed out something on the list, leave a comment below, hit the bell and like button, and subscribe to the channel. And hope you like the content. I'll see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.